today's job we've got a Defender Td5. Now the Td5 engine can suffer with this problem on a regular basis. What happens is the wastegate that sits on the top of the manifold can stick, and the symptoms that this causes primarily are under heavy load. It feels like the engine's misfiring. The reason for this is because what happens is if the wastegate is sticking, as the actuator kicks in and pushes the actuator rod to open and close the wastegate, if it's sticking, it's not opening and closing fully, and as a result of that, what happens is the ECU temporarily shuts down fuel, so it feels like it's a misfire. This tends to happen under heavy load more than anything. Through the low range gears, it seems to be absolutely fine. It only happens when you put your foot down under heavy load, and that's because it reaches a certain pressure. I think it's about 2.2 bar. Once it reaches that threshold, ECU kicks in and it feels like it's kind of kangarooing and misfiring. So it's quite a common thing. It sits under here. There's an exhaust heat shield, or a heat shield that sits on top of the manifold. So we'll show you how to take this off first of all, and then free up the wastegate. Okay, so this here is the actuator. This here is the actuator rod, and then under there is the wastegate itself. Okay, so you can see that it's difficult to get to. In order to get this off, you've got an 8mm bolt here, an 8mm bolt there, but normally down here it's riveted on, so you will need to get a drill. Okay, so we'll show you how to get this off. Okay, so once you've got the heat shield off, you can see here, look, you are going to have to drill those all the way through, which we'll do in a second. If you don't have a rivet gun, you could just pop a nut and bolt through that. And then here, you can now see the actuator valve. Okay, so this is the actual, sorry, the actuator valve is here. This is the rod, and this is the wastegate that we're talking about. Now what a lot of people do here is they get a set of pliers and they try and pull this backwards and forwards, but it doesn't give you a true indication as to whether this is sticking or not. So the way to do that is we need to slacken this little nut here, and then what we can do is we can actually remove this rod, and then we can check the wastegate, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so you need a 10mm spanner for this, but this can be quite tight. So a pair of grips just to hold the rod, stop it from turning inside the actuator, just so you can undo that. Makes life a lot easier. Now, there's a clip here. You need to take that off as well, okay? So we can remove this out of the way. So to get the clip off, a little spade end screwdriver, and it just prizes off, okay? And that's what it looks like. So once that's off, you can slide the actuator rod and then we can get access to the wastegate. Now, to make life a lot easier, on the back of the actuator there's a further two 10mm nuts. If we undo those, we can actually move all of this, the complete assembly, out of the way. And I've got a feeling that this is absolutely stuck fast at the minute, so we'll have a look. So undo these two 10mm nuts, and slide the assembly out the way and let it rest there. Okay. Now what we're looking for in here is for this to move freely, and as you can clearly see, that is not the case. This should be able to move back and forth and spring back into place of its own accord, and it's not doing. So what we need to do now is give this some penetration spray, and we need to keep working it backwards and forwards until it becomes free and it moves by itself. Okay, you don't want to damage the arm, so with a pair of grips you can already see it's starting to become free. Make life easier, do it from the top, but I'm doing it from the bottom so that you can hopefully see what's going on. Okay, so that's instantly a lot freer than what it was, but it's still not coming back of its own accord. Okay, so keep going. So just as a reminder while we're doing this, the symptom that I had then with this Td5 was no smoke whatsoever on startup or pulling through the gears. Pull through the gears really well in all gears, first right through to fifth. But it doesn't matter what gear you're in, if you then put your foot down, what happened was it was starting to kangaroo, felt like a misfire. So the first thing you think of is, oh, okay, is it the fuel pump, is it the fuel filter? But this has had a service recently, so you can see now it's starting to get nice and free, but keep going. So as I said, it had a service recently, so I only ever put decent parts on here, so I didn't think it was a dodgy fuel filter or anything. So the next thing is to look at, okay, well, why is it misfiring? Well, like I said, in this instance it's purely down to the fact that it was the actuator or the boost control valve. What was happening was this wastegate was sticking, it wasn't opening fully, and as a result of that the boost pressure was telling the ECU something's wrong and the fuel is shutting down. Now, it shuts down very intermittently, literally in a kind of nanosecond, but that's enough to cause a misfire and for you to think there's something catastrophically wrong. But as you can clearly see, that isn't the case. So this is already so much better, but I can still feel it. It is a little bit sticky in places, so we'll keep going. Okay, so I've been working at this now for about 10 minutes. Lots of penetration fluid to free up this wastegate. It is now at the point where if you push it back towards the actuator and let go, you can see that it's swinging down freely by itself, and that's how it should be. Okay, so this is now lovely and free. Now, another point to mention here is actually on the actuator rod itself, there is talk around how many of the threads should be showing on here. And actually, if you shorten, so you wind this in, I've just done that one turn just to demonstrate, put it back to what it was. If you shorten this, then you're increasing the boost pressure. Now you need to be cautious on this. You don't want to over boost, because if you over boost, you're going to have exactly the same problems as what you have with the sticking wastegate. The ECU will shut down and it won't drive properly. But actually shortening this by a thread or two can significantly enhance the power output of the Td5 engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it once, I'm going to rotate it twice, and then I'm going to lock this back off into place, just with the finger tight at the minute. I'm going to place this back in here, and okay, so slide it back on, and then you can see here, if you rotate this just to take the tension back up, push that on, push your clip back on to hold that into place. Okay, that's now secure. We'll put the two knots on here to secure this, and then we'll look at setting the rod to the right length. You don't need to over tighten them. This is purely just to hold it in place. Okay, so if I just wind this locking up back, you can see here where you've got the dirty thread and then the clean thread. So you can play around a little bit with this and change the length of this. Like I say, if you shorten this, what will happen is you're starting to pull the diaphragm inside the actuator out, and you need to trial and error this a little bit. Some people put boost pressure valves on and all kinds of stuff off the manifold. If I'm honest, I'm not planning on doing that at this stage, but probably at a later date, yes. So all I've done here is I've taken it back up to the point where if I lock the nut off, just inside there, I can see the clean thread of where it was originally. So I'm putting this back to stock for now. I do plan on adjusting it at a later date. Okay, so just to go through that again, take the locking nut off, and all you want to do is turn this up and down to shorten and lengthen the actuator rod. Okay, you just put that back. Okay, and then put your locking nut into place. So same as when we undid it, just get a pair of grips just to hold that in place and just tighten the locking nut up. Doesn't need to be over tight, just crimp it up into place. Okay, now again, to demonstrate, this is the importance of taking all this assembly off, because if you were to try this now, you think, oh, that wastegate's stuck, but actually there's no indication, no way to check that at all unless you take all the assembly off. A couple of points to note before we put the heat shield back on is we've got penetrating fluid on top of the manifold, so you're going to get a bit of a burning smell for a couple of days until that burns off. Again, if you find that you put your foot down and the same symptoms are happening, then obviously we need to start looking at other things, potentially some oil in the red ECU lead, but we're going to do that in another video. But before you check anything like that, make sure this actuator rod isn't too short and that it's over boosting again. Okay, so the final job for me to do now is to drill those two rivets out that we said before, just a swarf, put the heat shield back on into place, and then we're good to go. sure it's not on hammer. Can be a little bit fiddly, this job. Okay, so tighten those back up. Then down here where you've drilled your holes out, you can either rivet it, or as I said, I'm going to put a couple of nuts and bolts in. That's back on. Make sure this is free underneath, that it's not fouling, it's not touching on there. And that's it, job done. So hopefully that will help you out with the symptoms we've described. Feel free to leave any comments and any ideas on any further videos that you'd like to see on all of the Land Rover ranges, from a Series 1 right the way through to the Discovery, Defender, Td5s. And yeah, thanks for watching.